The $5 bill was folded twice, which was how you knew it was deliberate. Kaito Sugihara did not do anything by accident. He was 71 years old, and he had spent most of those years learning that the world sorted itself into people who wanted something from him and people who were afraid of him, and that these two groups covered, between them, nearly everyone he had ever met. He had stopped expecting a third kind of person somewhere around his 50th birthday. He had stopped hoping for one a good deal earlier than that. So he tested people. It had become a habit, and then a compulsion, and then, in these last years, almost the only entertainment left to a man who had everything and trusted no one. He would arrange a small situation, a minor pressure, a modest temptation, and he would watch what people did when they thought the stakes were low and no one important was looking. He had learned that people showed you their whole character and the moments they believed did not count. The diner was the kind of place he was not supposed to be. That was rather the point. He had left the driver 2 blocks away and walked the rest. An old man in an unremarkable coat, and he had taken a booth by the window in a place where the coffee was bad and the vinyl seats were cracked, and no one had any idea who he was. He came to places like this precisely because no one knew him. A man who is feared everywhere he is recognized will drive a long way to sit somewhere he is not. Before I tell you what this waitress did with a folded $5 bill, and I promise you it is going to be smaller and stranger and more important than you are expecting. Small enough to rewrite an old man's entire will. Stay with me. Subscribe if you're new here, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. These stories have a way of reaching corners of the world I never expect, and I love to see them. The waitress was called Eboli. Kaito learned this from the small handwritten tag pinned crookedly to her apron, because the diner did not run to printed ones. She was somewhere in her late 20s, he guessed, and she moved through the near-empty room with the particular economy of a person who had been on her feet for a very long time and had a great many hours still to go. He watched her for most of an hour before he did anything. That was his method. You could not test a person you had not first observed, because the test only meant something against a baseline, and the baseline was who they were when they thought no one was watching at all. She was good at the job. That was the first thing. Not performing at it, good at it, which is different and rarer. She refilled cups before they were empty. She noticed the old man 3 booths down who was struggling with a jar of jam and opened it for him without being asked and without making anything of it. She was kind to the cook through the pass-through in a way that suggested the kindness was habitual rather than staged. And she was tired in a way that went past the feet, a bone tiredness that Kaito recognized because he had seen it in people who were carrying something heavy and had been carrying it a long time. He set his test in motion the way he always did, quietly, with a small piece of theater. When she brought his check, a coffee and a slice of pie, the whole of it under $6, he paid with a large bill and told her, in the mild voice of a slightly confused old man, to keep the change. The change came to a little over $5. It was, on that bill, a large tip, roughly the size of the meal itself. Ordinary in a good restaurant, extravagant here. And then, as she thanked him and turned to go, he added the second part. This was the part that made it a test. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, patting his coat with the fussy vagueness of the old. "I've made a mistake. That was meant to be. Could I have some of that back? I'm short for the bus." It was a small, ugly little trap, and he had sprung it 100 times. It was designed to reveal the exact shape of a person's honesty at the seam, where their interest met his. He had watched people pretend not to hear. He had watched them argue that a tip, once given, was given. He had watched them hand back the money with a resentment they could not quite hide, or with a servility that was worse, In all the years he had run this test, in all its variations, he had catalogued perhaps a dozen distinct species of the way people behave when you offer them money and then, apologetically, ask for it back. He had never once seen what Billy did. She turned back, and she looked at the folded bills in her hand, and then she looked at him. Really looked the way people almost never looked at him anymore, as though he were a person rather than a problem to be managed, and she did not hand the money back. Instead, she pulled the chair out across from him and sat down. "You're not short for the bus," she said. It was not an accusation. That was the strange thing. There was no edge in it at all. She said it the way you would gently correct a child who was telling a story you both knew was not true, with a kind of patience that had room in it for the lie. Kaito, who had not been surprised by another human being in some years, found that he had nothing prepared to say. "You've been sitting there an hour," Billy went on, quietly. So it stayed between the two of them. "You've got good shoes under that old coat. And a man who's really short for the bus doesn't tip $5 first and ask for it back second. He just doesn't tip. So I don't think this is about the money." She set the folded bills down on the table between them, not pushing them at him, just placing them where they could both see them. "But you can have it back if you need it. Of course you can. I'm not going to make an old man beg for bus fare, whether the story's true or not." She said the last part completely, without irony. That was what undid him. She had seen through the entire construction, the theater, the test, the folded bill, all of it, and having seen through it, she had decided to give him the money anyway. Not because she was fooled. Because she was not the kind of person who would let someone go without, even a someone she had just caught lying to her, even at the cost of $5 she plainly needed more than he did. "Why?" Kaito said. It came out rougher than he intended. "Why what?" "You know I'm lying. You said so. Why give it back?" Billy considered this. She had the tired, thoughtful patience of a person for whom the question of why you help people had long ago stopped being complicated. "Because I don't know your reasons," she said. "Maybe you're testing me. People do sometimes, though usually not this elaborately. Maybe you're lonely, and this is the only way you know how to make somebody sit down with you. Maybe you really are short and too proud to just say so, and the good shoes are 10 years old. I can't see the inside of your head." She shrugged, a small motion, worn smooth by repetition. "But I decided a long time ago that I'd rather be wrong about someone and out $5 than be right about them and cold. Being right isn't worth what it costs to get hard. So, take it or don't. It's yours." The diner hummed around them. The cook clattered something in the back. The old man 3 booths down turned a page of his newspaper. Kaito Sugihara sat across from a waitress he had come here specifically to deceive, and he understood, with the sudden completeness of a thing that has been waiting a long time to be understood, that he had spent 30 years testing people to find out whether the third kind of person existed, and that he had built his entire method around the assumption that they did not, and that the assumption had been a wall he had put up so that he would never have to feel the specific grief of learning he was right. And here, at a cracked vinyl table, over a folded $5 bill, he had been proven wrong. He did not take the money back. He pushed it, gently, toward her. "Keep it," he said. "I wasn't short for the bus. You were correct about that, and about the rest of it too. I'm sorry to have played a game with you. It's a habit of an old man who has forgotten how to talk to people any other way." Bill looked at the money, and then at him, and she did not pick it up. "You don't have to buy your way out of it," she said. "The apology's enough. I've had worse games played on me for higher stakes." She almost smiled. You're not the first man to sit in my section and try to find out what I'm made of. You're just the first one polite enough to say sorry after. Funny thing about being tested your whole life. It teaches you to spot the test. And it teaches you, if you're the right kind of person, to pass it without ever letting on how much it cost you to keep passing. Kaito asked if he could buy her a coffee if she had a break coming. She did, in 20 minutes. She said yes, warily, the way a person says yes to a stranger who has already shown himself to be strange, but who has also, in the same breath, shown himself to be harmless in the ways that mattered. They talked for the length of her break, which was 15 minutes, and then for the length of the next lull, which was longer. He did not tell her who he was. He told her he was an old man with a large family and a great deal of money and very few people he trusted, which was all true, and which she received with the mild, unimpressed sympathy of a person who had met wealthy unhappiness before and did not find it especially tragic. She told him, when he asked, and only when he asked, the shape of her own life, the mother she was caring for, the double shifts, the schooling she had put on hold and told herself was only paused. She did not tell it as a tragedy either. She told it as logistics, as a thing to be managed, with the flat competence of someone who did not have the luxury of self-pity. He noticed she never once asked him for anything. That was the thing he kept turning over, later, in the car, and then for many nights after. He had sat across from a woman who was drowning slowly under the ordinary weight of an ordinary hard life, a woman for whom $5 was a real quantity, and she had spent their entire conversation not asking. She had refilled his coffee for free. She had told him about her mother's illness, and had not, by so much as an inflection, angled it toward the wealthy stranger's wallet. When a person like Abili found herself sitting across from a person like Kaito, every survival instinct she had should have been screaming at her to ask, to hint, to open the smallest door. She had not opened it. She had, if anything, closed it, because she had understood that opening it would have changed the thing between them into a transaction, and she would rather have the true small thing than the false large one. Kaito went home that night and did not sleep, which was ordinary, and thought about his will, which was not. His will was a monument to his distrust. It was hundreds of pages long. It divided a very great fortune among relatives and associates and institutions according to an elaborate calculus of leverage and obligation and old debts. Every clause designed to reward loyalty and punish betrayal and keep the whole quarrelsome structure of his life balanced against itself even after he was gone. He had spent years on it. It was, he had believed, his masterpiece, the final, permanent expression of a lifetime's hard-won understanding that people were, at bottom, exactly as grasping as his tests had always shown them to be. He read it that night with new eyes, and he saw it for what it was. It was the document of a man who had been proven right his whole life because he had only ever asked the questions that had one answer. He had tested people at the seam of their self-interest, and self-interest had answered, every time. And he had called that the truth about human beings, but it was not the truth about human beings. It was the truth about the test. Ask a drowning person whether they will grab the rope, and of course, they grab the rope. He had spent 30 years lowering ropes to drowning people and concluding, from the grabbing, that no one was good. And then a woman who was drowning had been handed a rope in the form of a rich and lonely old man's obvious wealth and obvious loneliness, and she had not grabbed it. She had, instead, worried about whether he had bus fare. He did not leave her the fortune. He understood, even in the first flush of it, that this would have been another kind of test, a life-destroying one, the kind that turns a good person into a target and a curiosity, and eventually, often, into something worse. He had watched sudden money ruin better defended people than a tired waitress with a sick mother. To hand her that would not have been generosity. It would have been the last and cruelest test of all, and he had, at last, lost his appetite for testing people. What he did instead took months, and lawyers, and a great deal of quiet care. He established things. A fund that paid, permanently and anonymously, for her mother's care, arranged so that it could never be traced to a person, and never be taken away. A scholarship, structured to look like an ordinary institutional award, that happened to fit her exact circumstances so precisely that she would qualify almost automatically, and would believe, forever, that she had earned it herself. Which, he decided, she had. He arranged that the diner where she worked, which was failing, would quietly find itself under new and generous ownership that valued its long-serving staff. He built her a floor to stand on, and he built it so carefully out of ordinary-looking pieces that she would never see his hand in any of it, because he had learned, at 71, from 15 minutes across a cracked table, that the whole art of giving to a person like Eboli was to do it in a way that did not cost her the dignity that had made her worth giving to. And he rewrote the will. The real one. He tore up the monument to his distrust, and in its place he built something that gave the bulk of his fortune not to the relatives who had passed his tests by being predictable, but to the work Ebile had shown him without knowing she was showing him anything. The quiet, unglamorous, permanent business of catching people before they hit the ground. Care homes, scholarships, the kind of help that arrives without a name attached, so that the person receiving it never has to feel watched, or measured, or in debt. He went back to the diner once more, months later, before the end, when he could still travel. He sat in her section. She recognized him and came over and asked, with real warmth, how he had been, and refilled his coffee before he asked. She did not know, and would never know, that the small securities that had lately, mysteriously entered her life had entered it through him. He made sure of that to the last. He tipped her, that final time. Not $5, and not a fortune either, just a good, ordinary, honest tip, the kind a grateful old man leaves a waitress who has been kind to him. And he did not ask for any of it back. "You take care of yourself," Eboli said as he stood to go. "It's a cold season for old men in thin coats." "My coat is warmer than it looks," Kaito said. "You were right about that, too. It usually is." She laughed, not understanding, and he let her not understand, and he walked out into the cold with the particular peace of a man who has finally, at the very end, been given a reason to believe he had been wrong about everything that mattered. Here is the thing the powerful learn last, if they learn it at all. You can spend a whole life testing people, and every test will come back with the answer you were afraid of, and you will call that wisdom. But the tests were never measuring the people. They were measuring the smallness of what you were willing to offer them. Lower a rope to a drowning man, and you learn nothing except that he wants to live. It is only when you sit across from someone who has every reason to grasp, and watch them worry instead about your bus fare, that you finally understand the thing the tests were built to hide from you, that goodness was never rare. It was only rarely asked the right way. An old man went looking, for 30 years, for proof that no one was worth trusting. He found the opposite in the end, folded twice, on a cracked vinyl table, in the hands of a woman who would rather be wrong and out $5 than right and cold. And it changed where everything he owned would go.